Slashers. Crime stories paired with bloodshed. A slasher genre staple. Well, Germany and Italy had a fair share of slasher films in the late 50s and 60s, but here in America we were introduced to the mind of Alfred Hitchcock and his masterpiece, Psycho. That's right, Psycho. And in the 19th century, we get a 3-minute film, The House of the Devil, and between Psycho and that, a slasher genre is born. The stabby baddie was in the spotlight, and that's right. So the 70s, the slasher films were on the rise. The 70s introduced us to lasting horror villains. We got holiday horror, Silent Night, Bloody Night, and Black Christmas, and of course, Halloween. Halloween, which was inspired by Black Christmas. Films like The Toolbox Murderers and Alice Sweet Alice came along as well, and the 70s opened the doors for our next generation of slashers into the 80s. But obviously the 70s came along and added slasher fright with that merciless and relentless bloodshed, as well as a psychological cat and mouse with Laurie and Michael. Well, the 80s, they opened the door as Sean S. Cunningham offered his concept killer in Friday the 13th, which gave us a whole new creepy vibe to camping. Camp and slashers went well together, as did the success from Friday the 13th and Sleepaway Camp. Now, when Wes Craven returned from the nightmare world of Freddy Krueger, he continued slashers with the success of Scream, which breathed new life into horror and the slasher genre and movie tropes. Plus jump scares, and the victims knew a thing or two about slasher films, which also introduced urban legend, I Know What You Did Last Summer, bringing teens to the center in horror films. And obviously with Wes Craven bringing us Freddy Krueger, he allowed that slasher that could kill you, plus give you that personality added to the kills, which obviously opened the door for like Chucky and Leprechaun and Candyman. And with Wes bringing our nightmares to life through Freddy Krueger, gave us a new generation of slasher horror. Now today's slasher subgenre is more flexible and incorporates many tropes, like American Psycho, where we get that psychological mixed with slasher. You got High Tension, which is a slasher element yet offered more in the film. We saw movies that pushed boundaries like Wrong Turn, Saw, Hostel, The Purge, Green Inferno. And of course, today, we get the comedic slashers like in Happy Death Day, Ready or Not, and Freaky. And they honor slasher films' history in its own way, yet paves a road for today's horror fans. Now, slasher films were pretty much criticized for its gore, extreme violence, but for fans, this was the appeal. Now, when you think of horror movies, you obviously think that they are trying to evoke the viewer's worst nightmares as a form of entertainment. You get ghosts, demons, murderers, supernatural beings. You get that gore, the torture, the jump scares, which manipulates the audience into experiencing psychological thrills and fun. Films today, they boast new technology and they make the theatrical elements more lifelike and realistic to the audiences. But the genre of horror definitely predates the film industry. In fact, it's been around for centuries. And since the genre's conception, the horror industry has always found ways to incorporate new technology and themes. So basically with slasher films, you do have some components. You got the killer. Usually they're masked, and they're often on a path of blind revenge for some past tragedy. Then you have the victim, which is usually a group of youngsters, hormone-driven, and not really too smart when they're being stalked by the killer. And it could be campers, counselors, schoolmates, and they can be in a lot of different areas. Then in the slashers, we have the final girl, which sometimes you get a guy, but it's usually primarily a girl who abstains from a sinful behavior from the rest and ends up being the last alive, most of the time defeating the killer. And nowadays, with slasher movies, it would be hard to call any film a slasher without the inclusion of a final girl. We usually get isolated settings like campsites or the woods, and then of course you get your buckets of blood and shock value violence. And obviously, blood and gore can be commonly found amongst the slasher movies. What else is a recognizable trait of the slasher genre? Well, we can say that the powerful, masked villain is a recognizable trait of the slasher genre. We have had some impactful slasher films over the years, but we have to say thanks to Alfred Hitchcock and Psycho's impact on the audiences and that storytelling and the filmmaking mastery to allow the next generation and the next generation of slashers to come.